fasting can negatively affect cortisol.
It doesn't have any different benefits to just being in what's called
This can be a nightmare if you're looking to try and lose weight and tone up.
And this is especially problematic for women who are active.
The key thing is really to not do any kind of...
What fasting really is hello and welcome to the Trinity Fit Over 40 podcast with me, Rob Burkhead.
And me, Ben Hughes. We are the co-founders of Trinity Transformation and creators of the Fit Over 40 method. And together with our world-class coaching team, we've helped more than 6,000 women over 40 to fit back into their favorite clothes over the past decade. For more information about what we do, go to www.fit40info.com. So fasting is regularly promoted as a powerful health and weight loss solution by a lot of celebrities or social media influencers. And despite some of the amazing results that people post online, does it actually work for women around menopause?
So we've worked with so many women who've given fasting a go, think it was the magical solution they'd been searching for, and they'd skip meals, they'd power through hunger, and they'd hope to see the pounds melt away, especially from around the middle. But then they'd step on the scales and see zero movement, or worse, they'd actually see the number creep up, especially extra pounds creeping on in that middle area. And that is never a nice situation to be in.
As you say, Rob, like for a lot of women over 40, fasting, it can end up backfiring, leaving them heavier, feeling more frustrated, feeling defeated. Instead of seeing those pounds come off, they just end up stuck, unable to lose weight. Despite having restricted themselves, put in loads of effort to this kind of dieting approach, they just end up either heavier than they were or not losing any weight and just wondering if there's something wrong with them or if they're just going to have to accept all this extra weight as a part of the kind of aging process. And after putting all of that effort, a lot of the women that we've coached, they end up still struggling to fit into their favorite clothes. They are choosing clothes to cover up problem areas rather than wearing the things they want to wear and just watching their weight creep up and up every year. So, Rob, first things first, what is fasting and why does it not tend to work for women around menopause?
So there's a couple of different types of fasting. Essentially, it's going periods of time without eating. Now, the classic fasting that most people refer to is 16-8 fasting or something similar to that. So that's where you go 16 hours without eating and then an 8-hour eating window. So that might be between midday and 8 p.m. or 1 p.m. and 9 p.m. Typically, people tend to skip breakfast when they're doing the 16-8 fast. A couple of other ways people also do fasting is you can have a weekly fasting schedule. So something like the 5-2, where you have 2 very low calorie days. They're not actually full fasting. So it might be 500 calories a day for 2 days and then 5 days of eating as much as you want. And then we also have multi-day fasting. So this is where people do like a 48-hour fast or a 3-day fast. And that's one of the more extreme types of fasting. And kind of just as a little bit of nuance to this, we also have things like Ramadan at certain times of the year. We have lots of clients who do Ramadan, and that's typically where people fast between sunrise and sunset. And that can change depending on the time of year. But essentially, it's going periods of time without eating. But there's a big problem with fasting in general. So those are the types of fasting. But the big problem I see with fasting is that the research is not very good for women around menopause. There's almost no studies for women around menopause. So I did another check today because I knew there weren't many studies out there, and there still aren't. There's only really 1 or 2 studies that include menopausal women in any shape or form in those studies. So most people who are quoting research or facts in inverted commas about fasting are doing it based on studies that are done on a generic group of people, usually men and women, and often younger men and women who are students or people who are younger who have more time, because the way these studies work is people get paid a small amount to do them. It may not seem like such a small amount to a student, but you need to have lots of free time to be able to go and do these studies so that you can be monitored properly and all the rest of it. So usually it's students and younger men and women who are doing these, not always. Or it might be much older men and women who are kind of retired. And that typically skips the entire perimenopausal window there. So I couldn't find any studies on perimenopausal women. This is women who are going through hormonal changes between premenopause and postmenopause, where your periods stop entirely. And perimenopause can last a long time. So for a lot of women, it's from their late 30s all the way to about age 50. And that is what a lot of people refer to as menopause. There's not very good scientific research on whether fasting works for menopausal women. So in my opinion, we can only really go on our understanding of the science of menopause weight loss, which we'll explain today. Ben, if you want to go into that in a minute, and then the empirical data from helping women to lose weight around menopause. And we've worked with over 6,500 women over the past decade. So we have quite a lot of data on this. And we also lean on the research of people like Dr. Stacey Sims, who has spent decades working with female athletes and women to lose weight and tone up and be fit and healthy. And again, she has a lot of experience. So that's one person whose experience I'd also kind of like to lean on and we can share today. So Ben, what do we actually know in terms of the science of menopause weight loss, and then how does that relate to fasting?
One thing that we know is that fasting can negatively affect cortisol. If you've listened to this podcast before, you've probably heard us talk about cortisol. Cortisol is the main stress hormone. So when you experience something stressful, your cortisol levels will increase. So after you wake in the morning, your cortisol level will spike about 30 minutes after waking. Cortisol is one of the key hormones that you need to manage around menopause as well. And when you eat in the morning, that actually brings your cortisol levels down. And this especially happens if you eat protein rather than other food groups like carbohydrates or fats. Now, fasting will actually do the opposite. So if you wake up in the morning as a woman around menopause and you skip breakfast and you have nothing in the morning, what this will do is you'll have that spike in cortisol, and then that will kind of just continue to increase your levels of stress and your levels of cortisol. So why is this a bad thing? Why do we want to avoid having our cortisol levels being too high? So if your cortisol level is too high, what we call, and for kind of too long as well, what we call kind of a chronically elevated level of cortisol, this can trigger something we call the weight gain triangle, which is basically a nice term for three effects that tend to happen if you have high cortisol. The first of these is leptin resistance. So leptin is a hunger hormone, and what that will mean is you have increased cravings, especially for carbohydrates as well. So you're more likely to overeat without actually realizing it, because you'll just feel hungrier throughout the day. The second impact is insulin resistance. And what this is going to mean is that not only will you store more body fat, but you'll also tend to store more body fat around the middle area. So especially that kind of belly fat will start to increase, and it will also just kind of prevent you from being able to lose that belly fat as well. And the third impact is thyroid deregulation. So your thyroid is a gland which is responsible largely for your metabolism. So what this means is it's going to reduce your metabolism, meaning that over the course of the day, you're not going to burn as many calories, and therefore you're more likely to gain weight. So essentially, if you don't eat first thing in the morning, if you decide to fast instead, it will elevate your cortisol levels. It will trigger this weight gain triangle. And this can be a nightmare if you're looking to try and lose weight and tone up.
Yeah, and this is especially problematic for women who are active. And we'll talk about later why that it is really important to be active around menopause and not just sedentary. But if you're active, that will also increase cortisol further, which is actually a good thing in short bursts, which exercise will do, but you want to bring it back down to a healthy, safe level as quickly as possible. And if you don't then eat, if you exercise in the morning and then don't eat anything or just have a black coffee, your cortisol is going to be way too high. And you really want to bring it down with that meal with protein, like you said, Ben. If you're fed up with trying everything and seeing no results,
watching your weight creeping up and struggling to fit into your clothes,
and you're looking for the fastest and easiest way to get your ideal weight
and never have to worry about your weight or health again,
you can save yourself years of trial and error by letting us take care of the hard work for you in our Fit Over 40 private coaching program.
Over the past decade, our world-class team have personally guided more than 7,000 women to take back control of their health and confidence, and more importantly, maintain those results for life.
If you're ready to finally get results at last and find out how we can help you do that too, click the link in the description below to get the full details now. Another thing that I think is really important to understand here is what fasting really is a way of achieving something that is essential for any form of weight loss. And it's often overhyped as some sort of almost magical solution that solves everything and has all of these unique benefits. And the reality is when experts look at all the data on fasting, it doesn't have any different benefits to just being in what's called a calorie deficit. So this is eating less calories than your body needs every day, which causes your body then to tap into its body fat stores and burn those body fat stores for energy. So a lot of people think fasting has all of these unique benefits that help with aging and aging better and autophagy and all of these fancy words. But really, when they look at someone who just doesn't overeat, which causes is the only cause of all weight gain, whether you're in menopause or not, the amount you can eat may change and the types of things you need to eat may change. But if someone isn't overeating, they get all the same benefits of fasting anyway. So improved blood pressure, improved cardiovascular disease risk is reduced, reduced cancer risk. All of these things just come from being in a calorie deficit anyway, which means eating less than your body is using every single day. And most people are not doing this. The average adult in the UK is overweight or obese. 66% of people are overweight or obese, which means they are not regularly eating in a calorie deficit. So fasting is obviously going to make you healthier, but it's only because of doing that calorie deficit. It's not because fasting is doing anything magical. And the reality is there's easier and a lot more flexible ways to achieve a calorie deficit without the drawbacks that are potentially negative around menopause. So without spiking that cortisol that you talked about, Ben. So the reality is when we look at all the data, when we look at all the science, fasting may be helpful for inactive women who simply are not going to exercise. And that may be you listening. You might just think, look, nothing you say is going to make me exercise. But just bear in mind, if that's you, you're still going to have the problem of losing muscle mass with age, which will accelerate the older you get. So you'll feel flabbier, you'll feel saggier, your bone will blend into your back and your legs. You'll get bingo wings. You'll feel not toned at all. You'll feel weaker. You'll feel slower. You'll struggle to walk up hills. You're more likely to fall and injure yourself. And that's then combined with a loss of bone density, which will happen if you're also inactive. So you'll get osteopenia. You might get osteoporosis, so porous bones, which can lead to severe pain. It can lead to falling and breaking bones, and that massively increases morbidity risk. I believe the latest research shows 1 in 2 women post-menopause will fall, and 1 in 2 of those will break a bone. And die within a year due to osteoporosis from post-menopause. And therefore, if you're inactive, you're way more likely to struggle or suffer from both of those things and age very rapidly. So I wouldn't recommend it personally, but if you're going to be inactive and you don't care or you want to ignore those things, you probably do care, but you might want to just choose to ignore those things, then fasting may work okay because you're not having to kind of bring that cortisol down post-exercise and you're not really doing much else. But there's a much better kind of approach, which also isn't that difficult or that complicated, which is going to work a lot better than fasting in our experience. So Ben, what would you suggest people do instead of fasting if they want to be fit and healthy, fit back into all their favorite clothes and all of those good things around menopause?
Rather than fasting, what I'd recommend is this approach. So the first thing would be in terms of exercise, making sure that you are exercising regularly, and the best exercise is going to be lifting weights 3 to 4 times per week or doing what we call low impact strength training or LIST. The benefit of this is obviously it burns calories as well because you're moving, but it's also going to help you maintain muscle mass. It's also going to help you build strength. It's going to help you to maintain your bone density as well. And crucially, it avoids ramping up levels of that stress hormone cortisol. So other kind of exercise, especially cardio exercise, especially kind of high intensity cardio exercise, will increase levels of that stress hormone cortisol, whereas lifting weights in a slow and a controlled way will avoid elevating that cortisol, meaning it's much more effective for losing weight and toning up around menopause. So when it comes to the nutrition side of things, the key thing is really to not do any kind of extreme dieting. So we can basically put fasting into that category because you're putting the body into kind of an extreme state by depriving it of food. So anything like that, fasting, cutting out entire food groups, really kind of low calorie approaches, all of those things are not going to be very effective because they're going to lead to that weight gain triangle. And that's essentially going to block you from seeing the results that you're actually trying to achieve. So instead, you want to take a more moderate approach. What we recommend is controlling what's called the key 3. So the 3 most important nutrients for women around menopause looking to lose weight are going to be calories, protein, and fiber. It's just about getting the right amount of those 3 things. So the amount of calories you aim for should be an amount which is slightly below the amount your body needs, meaning that you will lose body fat because you'll create that all-important calorie deficit that you were talking about previously, Rob. But you don't want to take those calories too low because the body will perceive that as stressful, and then that will therefore elevate that stress hormone cortisol. And then the other 2 food groups, so protein and fiber, you just need to be hitting kind of a a good amount of these, which typically tends to be slightly higher than the kind of average recommendation that people aim for, because the kind of recommended daily allowance people give for protein is just kind of enough to just survive, essentially. It's not enough to kind of thrive, to lose weight, to be fit, to be healthy, to feel your best. So you actually need quite a lot more than the kind of recommended daily allowance. It doesn't have to be a crazy amount, but if you roughly get around 30 grams of protein, something like that with every meal, that tends to work really well. And then the next thing to focus on, the final thing to focus on, would just be to stop eating at a certain time to create a kind of a milder and more gentle form of fasting. So it's creating an eating window that's kind of a more realistic one. So for example, if you stop eating at 8 p.m. and you start eating again at 8 a.m., which is a pretty normal cycle of eating, it just means that you have 12 hours of the day when you're eating, and you have 12 hours of the day when you are essentially fasting overnight. But this is doing this without it being something really extreme. But also it's likely to help you stay in that calorie deficit compared to imagine somebody wakes up for work at 5, they start eating at 5, and then they do an entire work day, they stay up really late, and they have a late night snack at like 12 p.m. They've got a much, much longer window of time that they're eating, of 19 hours in that case, and then only 5 hours where they're not eating. So that person is likely to eat more food overall, I would say, just because they're going to have more time to eat all of that food. And we have hundreds of examples of women who are following this simple 4-step approach. So just to recap: exercise with list training, don't follow extreme diets, control for the key 3, calories, protein, and fiber, and then just stop eating at a certain time in the evening, for example, 8 p.m., just to create a more gentle form of fasting. We have hundreds of examples of women who've done this and have seen phenomenal results around menopause, just like our client Nicola did.
Yeah, so Nicola is a company director from York, and she tried all sorts of different types of fasting. And she joined us just over 12 weeks ago now, and she shared this with us. So she achieved some phenomenal results in those 12 weeks without doing any types of fasting beyond that very mild form we just talked about there. So here's what Nicola said. Back in July, I was the heaviest I have ever been. Sluggish, not sleeping well, eating badly, drinking too much alcohol, and all my clothes were tight. I felt despondent and fed up. I was sick of being overweight and covering up in baggy clothes. I had an upcoming holiday, so I knew I had to make an effort or I would be miserable and ashamed of how I looked again whilst on holiday. Before Trinity, I had tried everything. Weight Watchers, Slimming World, Atkins, Jason Vale, juicing, fasting, 5-2, Slim Pod, Louise Parker, Joe Wicks, Scandi Sense. I lost weight initially on some of these, but after a few weeks, I lost motivation and momentum and the weight came back on. I've followed the programs for 12 weeks now, and I've lost 5 kilos and 16 inches. So that's just under a stone if you work in stone. I am more toned, energetic, stronger, sleeping well, and eating so much better. My clothes fit again, and some are even too big. I feel so much lighter in every way and hopeful that I can get back to the real me and feel proud of myself again after a long time feeling ashamed that I'm overweight. I'm back in control. I consider this program to be a re-education, and I've learned so much, not just about nutrition and exercise, but also about mindset and attitude and looking after myself in less obvious ways. It has been a lifesaver. Just do it. I was skeptical at first, but I'm now so glad I joined Trinity. The reviews speak for themselves. It's a fantastic program which gets results. I wish I'd known about it years ago.
Amazing. So Nicola lost almost a stone in 12 weeks, got back into all her favorite clothes and toned up all over without having to do anything extreme. She definitely didn't do anything like fasting. And if you want to find out more about the program that she followed, just head over to www.fit40info.com and you can grab all of the details on that page.
Thank you so much for joining us today. That just about wraps up for today's episode. We'll catch you next week for another episode. We will see you then. If you're fed up with trying everything and seeing no results,
watching your weight creeping up and struggling to fit into your clothes,
and you're looking for the fastest and easiest way to get your ideal weight
and never have to worry about your weight or health again,
you can save yourself years of trial and error by letting us take care of the hard work for you in our Fit Over 40 private coaching program.
Over the past decade, our world-class team have personally guided more than 7,000 women to take back control of their health and confidence, and more importantly, maintain those results for life.
If you're ready to finally get results at last and find out how we can help you do that too, click the link in the description below to get the full details now.